Welcome to Focus Today. I'm your host, Perry Atkinson. I think this past week we all watched with intense interest the rescue mission of SpaceX going up and getting the astronauts and bringing them home. What an honor today to have with us Dr. Charles Camarda. He is the former NASA astronaut, research engineer, inventor, and author of Mission Out of Control. He was selected as an astronaut in 1996. He flew NASA's return to flight mission following the Columbia disaster. With over 45 years at NASA, he's earned over 20 national and international awards, including the NASA Spaceflight Medal and the introduction into the Air and Space Cradle of Aviation's Museum Hall of Fame. He is the founder and the CEO of the Epic Education Foundation and president of Leading Edge Enterprises, LLC, which is an aerospace engineering and education consultancy. He does have a website, missionoutofcontrolbook.com, and there's the picture of the landing page as well as a picture of the cover of the book. So, Dr. Camarada, good to see you. How are you, friend?
Doing great. Thanks for having me, Perry.
Oh, what an honor. Wow. So what's your takeaway? What happened this past week?
Well, it was a very successful landing. SpaceX performed beautifully, perfectly. It was a perfect mission. Return flight from the International Space Station. Butch and Sonny, Nick Hague, Alexander are all healthy. They're back with us on Earth, and they're getting back in shape.
Were there any surprises for you to see?
Well, the only surprise that we all saw was the failure of the Starliner vehicle, right as it was getting ready to dock. Unfortunately, it had problems with its thrusters, it had helium leaks, and it was deemed inappropriate for the crew to fly back on that vehicle. And so that was a hiccup, but it's not unlike many things that happen when we fly in space. Many things happen on all missions.
Do you see Starliner returning?
I don't know. That's a tough call, Perry. Boeing has some serious financial problems, but aside from the technical issues that they have to overcome, I think Boeing as an organization has some serious cultural issues, just like NASA does right now.
What's your take on the fact that NASA, of course, you've been a part of NASA basically all your life, and then here comes people like SpaceX, and they do it faster and easier. How are you processing that in your head?
Well, I'm very happy that they're doing that, Perry, but that's how NASA used to be. And so the first half of my book, I talk about how we devolved into where we are now at NASA. NASA, during Apollo, had the best and the brightest that came from NACA, and they came from this research culture. And we did things as a research culture, what I call intelligent, fast failure, failing smart, fast, small, cheap, early, and often. And when I look at with Elon Musk, and I was asked this when I was on a panel at Berkeley, California, way back when, a student said, how come NASA isn't like SpaceX? And I said, NASA was SpaceX 50 years ago.
So what happened, Coach? What happened? They just get too many bureaucrats? What happened?
Absolutely. It became very bureaucratic. NACA, the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, started out with 3 small research centers at Glenn in Ohio, Langley in Virginia, at Ames in California. And we did advanced research to make our aircraft industry the best in the world, always looking at far-term research. When Apollo happened, things started to grow exponentially, large budgets, a lot of bureaucracy. Eventually, people stopped paying attention and funding research at NASA. Over 30 years ago, we started promoting managers that didn't have the technical expertise, started making bad decisions, just like what's happening at Boeing right now.
So, do we need NASA?
I think we do. I think it's very important because what I've learned over my 46 years at NASA is that we cannot depend on industry to do the far-term research. They love to do the near-term research. They're looking for the for the fast buck to satisfy their investors. We need the government to look at what's the next great thing that we need to be doing. What's the next advance in propulsion to get us deeper into the universe, et cetera. And I think that needs to be funded, just like it was during the aircraft industry. And then we form these strong partnerships with industry, and we make them the best in the world.
Okay, I want to come back to what happened with Starliner not performing and these astronauts getting stuck up there. Now, I'm a pilot, but I don't have the experience you have. But you're trained as a pilot to have a backup plan. Okay, you're always thinking about the what if. How come we would allow ourselves to get in a situation where we couldn't go rescue these people?
Yeah, that's a very, very good question. NASA always plans, has redundancies in systems, subsystems, has contingencies in case something goes wrong, random unexpected event, right? And so the plan would always be to take them back with a Dragon capsule. Unfortunately, the only one that was available on station at the time was Crew Dragon 8. It already had 4 crew members assigned to it. Butch and Sonny could have fit on that Dragon capsule, but I don't think they had enough spacesuits. The only other option would have been to put Butch and Sonny back in the Starliner and take their chances coming back to Earth, until Crew 9 launched for the International Space Station 3 months later. Mm-hmm. And so within those 3 months, it was uncertain if we had a major malfunction on the space station and we had to evacuate, how we would get Butch and Sonny down as safely as possible.
What are they going through right now, Butch and Sonny? It's post-landing. What's happening to them right now?
I'm sure they're being checked out by all the flight surgeons. They're having physical therapy. They're going through a rehabilitation process, their fluids, and they're getting looked over. And it'll take them, depending on their condition, probably 1 to 2 months to get back up to speed. Sometimes you never fully recover all the bone loss that you get in space, but so far we've been pretty lucky, and most of the astronauts come very close to retaining and regaining their full bone mass.
I guess the other thing that we were surprised to hear, that the International Space Station had enough to keep all those astronauts alive when they weren't planning for 2 more to be there for 9 months.
Yeah, there's plenty of supplies, plus they have cargo missions that go up to the International Space Station. I flew right after the Columbia accident. So there wasn't a space shuttle to the International Space Station for 2.5 years. We had to reduce the crew on Space Station to 2. And Space Shuttle, when we brought supplies, we brought over 8,000 pounds of supplies to the International Space Station because Space Shuttle was a much larger vehicle.
Do you miss the shuttle?
I missed the shuttle, but Perry, it was a very dangerous vehicle. It was probably the most dangerous space vehicle that we ever flew humans on. It had probably a 1 in 67.5 chance of not coming back. Ooh. And that's not good. And so what I see in this next generation, going back to the capsules, launch abort capability that we see on the Dragon capsule, the Blue Origin capsules, this is a much safer vehicle. And I think that's the way to go. We have to constantly be improving, increasing the safety of the vehicles, reducing the cost of the vehicles.
What's the lifespan of the International Space Station?
Well, it's probably exceeded its life expectancy. I see maybe 5 to 10 years. I think as soon as we could get something up there to take its place as quick as possible, I think we should deorbit the International Space Station. There are several commercial companies looking at a commercial orbiting space station right now.
Okay, I want to come back to kind of the core of your book, Dr. Camarda. The interesting thing about this is, are we too much in a hurry to do something in space at the cost of safety?
I don't think that's as much an issue as we don't have the right culture for safety. I talk about, the major problems and why we had Columbia accident and why we had Challenger accidents is because we lost our research culture. And a big part of that was a psychologically safe environment. Where I grew up as a researcher, we were allowed to have tough arguments, differing opinions, All voices are heard. If there were issues, we drove them down to truth, understanding the root causes before we went forward. That's not the case right now. We're not as technically competent, and we're preventing the voices that are speaking up from being heard. They're being silenced.
That's very dangerous.
Yeah, unfortunately, the first half of my book, I have to talk about how ugly it is, because even though I had 22 years as a research engineer at NASA before I became an astronaut, especially focused in the thermal protection systems, when I came back and was director of engineering and stood up and said we were unsafe to fly the next mission, they reassigned me and they tried to silence my voice, which is kind of crazy.
Wow, I got to process that. So, what's the hurry? What do you think is on the agenda? What do they want to do now?
It's all about production pressure. A lot of it is driven by political. You know, we're trying to maintain our schedule and budget. We're trying to do great things so that we continue to get funding to NASA. And so this political pressure is driving what Diane Vaughan calls a production culture, forcing people to be on schedule and budget, pushing the engineers. And when you have a disproportionate power, when the program managers that have the money are so much more powerful than the engineers, their voices get canceled and bad things happen.
Okay, so I guess I'm still pushing for the answer. So if it's pressure to be on schedule and on budget, to do what?
To like in our case, when we were training as astronauts, it was to complete the building of the space station. We promised we would have the space station built on schedule and budget, and it was years delayed by years and over budget by a lot. And so now we're trying to go back to the moon. And so look how far behind we are in our schedule in trying to get us to the moon and how much more it's costing us. We have to sell that to Congress every year. Every 4 years, we have administration changes. And so we're making some very bad decisions right now, even with our moon rocket.
So how much was a setback on the agenda when you have another private company using SpaceX to deliver a lunar landing?
Well, I think SpaceX could do it, right? And so now the next administration, and whoever the next administrator is, has to make a decision. Do we continue with this expensive SLS rocket that NASA was pushing, which costs $4 billion and can only launch once every 2 years? Or do we go with a Falcon Heavy and a Dragon-type capsule and a landing system that we could do much faster and much cheaper? And so we have to take another hard look at that architecture, because the planners that planned this Artemis architecture, I think did us a disservice. We didn't have the right people making decisions.
How much international pressure is NASA under?
We're under a lot of international pressure, not only NASA, but the entire United States. We could very well lose the next space race to the moon. I told this to the administrator of NASA before I retired in 2019. I was afraid that going forward, the way NASA is going, we could potentially lose the space race to China. Another thing we're very far behind is hypersonics research. When I was a young engineer, that's what was my specialty. We were leading the world in hypersonics. Right now, Russia and China have operational hypersonic weapons, and the United States does not.
Wow. All right, let me take a quick break here. Let me say to our viewers and listeners, check out the book, Mission Out of Control. That's also the website, missionoutofcontrolbook.com. There's the picture of the landing page, a picture of the cover of the book. Dr. Camarda has a website, and you can see that as Camarda.com. C-A-M-A-R-D-A. I apologize. CAMARDA.com. We'll be right back. Okay, welcome back. What an honor to have with us today Dr. Charles Camarda. He is a former NASA astronaut. A book you need to get a hold of, Mission Out of Control. It's also at a website, missionoutofcontrolbook.com. There's a picture of the landing site and the book. Certainly well experienced and been selected as an astronaut back in '96. And he flew on the return to flight mission, which was following the Columbia disaster. Dr. Camarda, were you nervous about that first flight?
Actually, surprisingly, Perry, I wasn't nervous. You know, I spent 2.5 years after the Columbia accident putting together teams to solve this problem, developing technology that we could fly in space that would keep us safe in the event that we had a debris strike similar to what caused the Columbia accident. And so I realized that the chances of having a catastrophe were the same, about 1 in 67. And I felt it was our duty to fly this mission to try to make the space shuttle as safe as possible.
Do you think we'll ever have a vehicle like the space shuttle in the future?
I think it's possible. You know, when I was a very young engineer, we worked on during Ronald Reagan years, that's how old I am, Perry, we worked on something called the National Aerospace Plane. Remember, that was the vehicle that was going to take off from a landing strip, fly directly into space, air-breathing hypersonic multi-cycle engines, flight and get us to Japan in about 2 hours. Unbelievably difficult, what I call epic challenge.
Mm-hmm. Why is returning to the moon so important?
Well, I think not only returning to the moon, returning to Mars, doing space exploration is important because it forces us to push ourselves to develop new technology. And most of the technology we develop is used for us right here on Earth. When you think about living off the land on the moon or Mars or other extreme environment, you have to preserve everything. You have to be very careful of your resources. And so how we clean water, repurpose water, develop new consumables, all that technology can be repurposed and used here on Earth.
One of the things also, Dr. Camarda, that we kind of struggle with is space trash. What are we going to do? Can we send a big magnet up there and gather it all up and fling it out there further? What are we going to do with this?
You know, there are several proposals out there to try to do something like that, and it's very difficult, as you might imagine. Space is vast, the material is spread out, it's moving, and how do we collect it? How do we make the near-Earth environment safe? Unbelievable, there's still plenty of space out there. It's a large ocean, so to speak, but it is a problem that we have to be aware of and do something about. We can't just explode satellites in orbit. It causes millions of very tiny particles, and those are very dangerous for people operating in low Earth orbit, like International Space Station.
So these altitudes, is somebody selecting, I mean, is it like flying into a controlled airspace at an airport? Are there altitudes where certain things are happening up there?
We fly the International Space Station at about 250 miles at an inclination of 51.6 latitude. I'm not familiar with the Chinese space station, but it's in a different location in space. We have geostationary satellites, of course, that are for military purposes. We have many communication satellites. All those large objects are known to us, and so they deconflict where the space station is so bad things don't happen. We basically monitor things about the size of a softball, if you will. And so if need be, we can deconflict a potential object striking the space station and maybe order a maneuver to get out of the orbit.
Of course, we see a lot what NASA does, but we don't see a lot what NASA doesn't do and what the military is involved in. I would imagine there's a lot of classified things going on in space, perhaps more than we can possibly imagine.
Well, you know, NASA doesn't usually get too involved in the classified projects. The National Aerospace was a restricted classified program, even though it was a civilian program. The technology that gets developed is advanced, and we don't want it to get into the hands of non-U.S. citizens, for instance. And so thank God we have many laboratories. We have several laboratories around the country in the Department of Energy and Department of Defense that are doing very advanced research.
Is Space Force performing as it should?
I think Space Force was a good call. I'm not sure exactly what it's doing right now, but they're doing amazing, amazing things. You know, they fly an orbiting mini space shuttle, if you will, that can stay up in space over 400 days. And it's totally remote and it's autonomous. Of course, we don't know what its mission is, and it lands just like a space shuttle.
Wow. Yeah, we've seen pictures of that. So I want to come to your book. What do you want people to have for a takeaway?
Well, the book is really two books in one, Perry. It talks about how bad NASA is, so people realize that, you know, they think NASA's this shining castle on a hill, that even NASA struggles with these very bad problems, just like Boeing does with culture. The second half of the book are my thoughts on how we fix this problem, how we get back to a research culture, how we teach NASA to work to solve complex problems by using multiple high-performing teams connected in a network, get rid of the bureaucracy, make it a very flat organization, and possibly using AI and natural language processing and machine learning to identify when we have problems, we notice weak signals in either behavioral problems that we need to fix in any one of those hundreds of teams or technical problems.
Do you think the higher up of NASA understands they have a cultural problem?
No, absolutely not. I tried to talk to Bill Nelson. I tried to talk to every NASA administrator. I recently told them I was writing this book. I think they need to listen to this story before it comes out. I told it to two people, the deputy administrator, the associate administrator. They basically blew me off. They didn't believe it.
Is DEI part of NASA these days?
I hope not. I know it was. I think they're divesting themselves of DEI. I think we need to be a meritocracy. We need to hire the best and the brightest, no matter who they are. We need to teach them how to work together in high-performing teams, which I talk about in the second half of my book. And that's what we need to do. We need the best and the brightest, period.
Well, it's alarming, it's frustrating, and it's kind of sad to hear this, because if they can't get this fixed, then can we trust them?
No, you're absolutely right. I had major concerns with the moon rocket that's going around the moon that they're getting ready to put astronauts on, Artemis 2. NASA basically covered up serious problems with the heat shield on Artemis 1 that came back from the moon and was unmanned. And they're failing to solve the problem. They're going to fly the same exact heat shield, and they're only going to modify the trajectory. And it's really a problem that they don't understand the physics of what is happening, why they have this failure.
Just back to another question a little bit. So to NASA, how much of a threat is private space exploration, i.e. X?
You know, I think if NASA doesn't get it right, we might have this one opportunity with the new administration and the new administrator that we get. Maybe someone would understand. But if we keep going the way we're going and taking all of NASA's funds, throwing it at a human space program that's poorly managed, poorly technically directed, and getting NASA to operate these huge systems, that's not what government agencies do best. If we continue to do that, I believe we should close the doors at NASA, and we should think about creating a different organization.
Yeah, I hear you loud and clear. It's not something that I'm enjoying hearing, but given the fact that it's space travel and it should be efficient, should be safe, I'm trying to figure out what the hurry is, and if it's just a cultural that's trying to throw a bunch of people up in space on different mission assignments, it's kind of alarming. I was even looking at Bezos taking people to the edge of space and back down. Are we playing around with something here?
No, I think it's great that commercial companies are doing this. You look at what SpaceX did with their Polaris Dawn. They put it in a very highly elliptical orbit. They put astronauts further out than we've been since Apollo, and they're conducting real science on these missions. They're training astronauts. When you think about it, this is the way that the aircraft industry went. Private industry should be going this way. They should be designing spacecraft. They should be flying humans in space, just like the aircraft industry does. And NASA should be conducting the research to make it safe, to make it as effective and efficient as possible.
Well, Dr. Camarda, you're an inspiration. Thank you for your time. We value a great deal. Thank you for your service. Let's stay connected. This is fascinating. Let me say to our viewers and listeners, pick up a copy of this called Mission Out of Control. There's a picture of the book. That's also the landing page, missionoutofcontrolbook.com. And he also has a landing site, or excuse me, his own website, charliecamarda.com as well. Check that out. Thank you, sir. You're a blessing. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, Perry. Great questions.
Thank you.